When was the last time you were happy? I mean, really, truly happy, not filled with an ever-present existential dread as you scroll through social media and are bombarded with images of terrible things happening around the world day after day after day. For many people, this was the summer of 2016. Why? Well, because a small little indie game launched that summer called Pokémon GO. Unless you're like 10 years old, in which case, why are you here? You will probably remember what a global phenomenon Pokémon GO was for a few months in 2016. You can still find people online fondly reminiscing about this time and joking that it was the closest we ever got to world peace. And given everything that's happened between then and now, I can see where they're coming from. It was a good time, but it was also kind of a weird time. Pokémon GO is turning 10 next year, so I figured I'd get ahead of the wave of retrospectives that is sure to come, and dive deep into what is honestly quite a fascinating cultural case study. Just like it's not safe to go into the tall grass without any Pokémon, it can also be unsafe to browse the internet without any protection. Some of you may remember that my channel got hacked a few months ago, so I've taken my online security and privacy very seriously ever since. Luckily, there's today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. When you connect to the internet, Surfshark encrypts all your personal information so that it's hidden from any bad actors. It's sort of like when Ash tells Pikachu to use Thunderbolt to blast away Team Rocket. I got hacked because I fell victim to a phishing scam, but had I been using Surfshark, it would have been a lot harder for Bitcoin Magazine to gain access to my account. It's also essential if you're someone who uses public Wi-Fi a lot, as those networks are unsecured, so anyone could potentially have access to your info. Nowadays, most people have multiple devices, so a VPN is kind of useless if it only works on one of them. Thankfully, Surfshark allows you to be protected across unlimited devices, so I can rest easy knowing my information is secure whether I'm using my PC, phone, or laptop. Surfshark also has an alert service that notifies you if your email address, ID, credit card, or other personal data gets leaked online, so you can take action immediately. Don't leave yourself vulnerable. Go to surfshark.com/randymoon or use code RandyMoon, all one word, at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN for free today. With their 30-day money-back guarantee, it's completely risk-free. Okay, back to the video. Before we get to the summer of 16, we of course need some historical context. The first thing I want to talk about is the Pokemon craze of the late 90s and early 2000s, dubbed Pokemania by the media at the time. While it's hard to think of the most profitable media franchise in the world as an underdog now, when Nintendo published the first Pokemon games, Red and Green, in Japan in 1996, they did not have very high expectations for sales figures. The games were developed for the Game Boy, which had been out for 7 years at that point, and was nearing the end of its lifespan. They were initially ignored by the media and garnered very little hype prior to release. However, thanks to promotions and contests featured alongside the Pokemon Pocket Monsters manga that ran in CoroCoro magazine, a monthly publication that was popular with kids at the time, word started to get out about the Pokemon games, and by September of 1996, 7 months after the game's initial release, they had sold over 1 million copies. Around this time, the trading card game and anime series were also being developed, and both found huge success upon release, with the TCG selling 87 million cards in its first 6 months, and the anime becoming the highest-rated program on TV Tokyo. Both served to expand Pokemon's audience even further. Despite the franchise's popularity in Japan, Nintendo originally had no plans for an international release, believing that it wouldn't hold much appeal to Western audiences. However, 4Kids Entertainment felt differently and offered to invest in an American localization in exchange for the anime and licensing rights. Nintendo agreed, and an aggressive marketing campaign for Pokemon was launched in the West in an attempt to replicate the success it had seen in Japan. The anime was first broadcast in the US on September 8, 1998. The day before my first birthday. Yes, I was born in 1997. I feel like every time I allude to my age in a video, I get a bunch of comments from people who think I couldn't possibly remember 9/11. The localized versions of Red and Green, now called Red and Blue, were released in North America a few weeks later, and releases in other regions followed shortly thereafter. The marketing efforts paid off. The game sold 200,000 copies in the US alone during their first month, and the anime became the highest-rated weekly children's show in syndication. In early 1999, the TCG was brought overseas and became so popular for kids to collect and trade with one another that they were promptly banned from many schoolyards. The supply of Pokemon-related goods could not keep up with the demand, leading to shortages. Pokemania was in full swing. This was great news for Nintendo, who had been suffering from lacking Nintendo 64 sales, as Pokemon's its popularity helped boost sales of the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Some have even gone as far as to say that the franchise helped save the company. Nintendo came together with Game Freak, the developers of the Pokémon games, and Creatures Inc., who managed the TCG, to form the Pokémon Company in order to capitalize on this success and direct the future of the franchise. Game Freak developed sequels to the first games, Gold and Silver, releasing in 1999 in Japan and 2000 in North America. However, Pokémania had already begun to slow down by this time, and these games didn't sell quite as well as their predecessors. People's prized Pokémon card collections that were once worth hundreds of dollars were now largely worthless as card sales slumped. Both Digimon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Came to North America in the early 2000s and dethroned Pokémon as the hot new Japanese import among kids. By 2002, Pokémania was declared to be over. Despite the craze having passed, Pokémon continued to produce new games, cards, seasons of the anime, and other products that did well amongst their core fanbase and new generations of kids throughout the 2000s and early 2010s. It looked like while they may never reach the heights they did during the Y2K era, they had carved out a space for themselves as a staple in pop culture. My own personal memories of how Pokemon was perceived by the general population at this time are that it was mostly thought of as something for little kids or geeks. I got into it a little late. I think for most people around my age, their first Pokemon games were Ruby Sapphire or maybe Fire Red Leaf Green, but I started with Pearl. And by the time I did, the refrain of "Pokemon is for babies" was often heard among my peers. I also don't remember there being a ton of Pokemon branded merchandise available outside of stuff that was directly related to the games or cards, not in Canada anyway. Whereas during Pokémania, there was Pokemon branded everything. Nonetheless, I continued playing every new generation of the Pokemon games all the way through high school, taking my Nintendo 2DS to school with me to play during my lunch period, because I had no friends to sit with. Even still, I couldn't help being a little embarrassed about my decidedly uncool for a 16-year-old hobby, and always felt really awkward playing in front of a bunch of other teenagers, and would kind of try to conceal my DS in my lap. But enough about me. How were Nintendo and the Pokemon Company doing during this time? Well, Nintendo was suffering once again from extremely lackluster Wii U sales. The 3DS was faring a bit better, but still lagged far behind its predecessor. With the proliferation of smartphones, mobile gaming was on the rise, but Nintendo was hesitant to hop on the trend for fear of essentially cannibalizing their already poor console sales. As for the Pokemon games, they had made the jump to 3D with Pokemon X and Y with mixed results and were trucking along as usual. In 2014, they decided to team up with Google for Google's annual April Fool's Day prank, and created a game in which players had to look for and catch Pokemon scattered around the globe on Google Maps. The joke being that the one who caught them all would be offered a position as Pokemon Master at Google. 25 Pokemon from each of the then 6 generations of games were available to be caught, as well as Mew, who only appeared after all of the others had been obtained. Initially only intended to last 3 days, it was extended for another 2 due to popular demand. Those who did catch them all received a congratulatory letter from Google and personalized Pokemon Master business cards. The game was cute, but what was more interesting to a lot of people was the video that Google put out to promote it. It showed people roaming around various locales in the real world, using their phones to catch Pokemon that appeared in their environment. Remind you of anything? I remember this video getting passed around social media and people remarking on how cool it would be if it were a real game. Among them, this eerily prophetic comment. I really wish Nintendo would team up with Niantic and create an augmented reality Pokemon game Ingress style. Interesting. But who is Niantic? Niantic Labs was a subsidiary of Google founded in 2010 by the head of Google's Geo division, responsible for Google Earth and Maps, John Hank. When Google restructured in 2015 under Alphabet Inc., Niantic became an independent entity. Their first project was Field Trip, an app released for Android devices in 2012 and iOS in 2013 that used the user's location and various databases to provide information and recommendations about points of interest in their surroundings. Prior to Pokémon GO, they were most known for a mobile game called Ingress, a sci-fi augmented reality game released in 2013 for Android and 2014 for iOS. In case you're not familiar, augmented reality, or AR, is a technology that layers real-time 3D rendered computer graphics over top of a portion of the real world as seen through some sort of display, in this case your phone. Similar to Field Trip, Ingress used players' locations to populate real-world points of interest nearby with portals that could be interacted with in various ways once the player is within range. Players could nominate local landmarks in their area to be included as portals in future updates of the game. Overall, it was fairly well received and garnered a dedicated player base, with over 7 million players by 2015. However, it was criticized for encouraging some risky behaviors. For instance, there were reports of players who were detained and questioned by police for loitering in out-of-the-way locations at odd hours while trying to capture a portal, and even some of people losing their lives due to being inattentive to their surroundings while playing. When thinking about what Niantic would do next, John Hank was inspired by Google and Pokemon's aforementioned April Fool's prank. He wanted to make the game that Wicked Toby741 had dreamed of a reality. Around the same time, then president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, decided it was finally time to embrace mobile gaming, lest Nintendo be left behind. Tsunekazu Ishihara, CEO of the Pokémon Company, and Junichi Masuda, co-founder of Game Freak, were particularly interested in Ingress. They met with Hank and decided that Ingress's concept was a perfect fit for the Pokémon franchise. Tatsuo Nomura, a former Google Maps employee and developer who had worked on Google's Pokémon April Fool's Day challenge, was hired by Niantic as director of the game. Pokémon GO was then announced on September 10th, 2015. The day after my 18th birthday. It all comes full circle. A trailer similar to the video made for the April Fool's Day challenge was shown off, promising a 2016 release date. The hype train was officially full steam ahead. Beta testing occurred throughout the spring of 2016, and the game was officially released on July 6 in the US, Australia, and New Zealand. Releases in other countries followed throughout the summer and remainder of the year, but some people, myself included, didn't want to wait and found ways to download and play the game early. The staggered release was ostensibly to reduce server strain, but the game ended up being even more popular than Niantic had anticipated, with traffic exceeding their expectations by 50 times, leading to frequent server crashes over the first few weeks of the game's release. After downloading the game and creating an account, players choose an avatar that then appears on the map based on their real-life geographical location. They are greeted by Professor Willow, Pokémon GO's own tree-named Pokémon professor, who introduces them to the game and tasks them with catching as many Pokémon as they can in order to aid in his research. As you move around in the real world, your avatar moves with you, and Pokémon will pop up on the map around you. To catch one, all you have to do is tap on it to initiate a battle. It will either appear in AR mode, in which the game uses your device's camera to show the Pokémon as if it is appearing in your surroundings, or against a generic background if you switch AR mode off. You have the option of throwing berries or Pokeballs at it by swiping up on the screen. If the catch is successful, information about the Pokémon can be viewed, such as its weight, height, type, moveset, and location caught. Different kinds of Pokémon will appear depending on where you are in the real world. Given Pokémon GO is a mobile game, it does differ from the mainline Pokémon games in a few ways. Upon catching a Pokémon, you receive two types of in-game currency that are instrumental in raising your Pokémon: Stardust and Candies. Both of these do exist in the mainline Pokémon games, but they are completely different here. Candies are specific to each species of Pokémon and are used to evolve a Pokémon of that species. Stardust must be used in addition to Candies in order to level up. A Pokémon's strength is measured in CP, or combat points, a number that is determined through a combination of the Pokémon's level, base stats, and IVs. Thus, it can go much higher than the 1 to 100 scale that Pokémon levels normally are. The player themselves can also level up from 1 up to 50 by gaining XP through catching Pokémon and various other activities. And of course, like any good mobile game in our late-stage capitalist society, there are microtransactions where you can pay real money for stuff like items and bag upgrades if you don't feel like grinding for them. Aside from collecting Pokémon, the other two major activities when the game launched were finding Pokestops and battling gyms. Both of these are scattered around the map, corresponding with real-world points of interest, just like Ingress's portals. Initially, the locations of Pokestops and gyms were just taken directly from Ingress, but some of them ended up having to be removed. More about that later. Since 2019, players have been able to submit locations they'd like to see turned into Pokestops. Once you're within range of a Pokestop, you can spin the photo disc to receive items like Pokeballs, potions, berries, or Pokemon eggs. Gyms can be challenged once you reach level 5. Before challenging your first gym, you'll be prompted to join one of 3 teams: Team Instinct, Team Mystic, or Team Valor. Gym battles are King of the Hill type matches in which a player fights for control of the gym on behalf of their team. Just like Pokemon catching works differently than usual, so too do battles. They are not turn-based. Instead, you furiously tap on the screen to use your Pokemon's fast attack on the opponent. After doing this for a while, your charge attack will be charged up and ready to use, inflicting greater damage than the fast attack. Pokémon GO notably launched without the ability to battle or trade with other players, both things that are staples of the mainline Pokémon games and were shown in the trailer for Pokémon GO. These features were eventually added a few years down the road, but this still seems to be a bit of a sore point with Pokémon fans. Another criticism was that the game only launched with 149 Pokémon from Generation 1 available to be caught. Pokémon from other generations were slowly added over the years, but as of writing this, there are still 121 Pokémon missing from the game. Mostly mythicals, legendaries, and alternate forms. Some other new additions to the game post-launch include the ability to choose a buddy Pokémon to follow you on screen, more character customization options, raid battles where multiple players team up to defeat a single Pokémon, Mega Evolution, Dyna and Gigantamaxing, and Team Rocket Go, a villainous team that occasionally will take over Pokestops, among other minor changes. I hadn't played the game since 2016 and re-downloaded it while researching for this video, and while it still felt familiar at the base level, I could definitely tell that there was a lot more going on than when I last played. The most noticeable thing was obviously just that there were way more Pokemon to choose from now. I remember there mostly being a lot of Zubat, Rattata, and Pidgey back in 2016, which is pretty authentic to the Gen 1 experience, I'll give them that. I also appreciated getting to wear a shaman on my head and make the autism creature Pokemon my buddy. Alright, back to July 2016. Pokémon GO became a worldwide sensation almost immediately upon its release. You want to talk about a cultural reset? This was like the definition of that. Brat Summer was fun and all, but even it can't compare to Pokémon GO Summer. By the end of July, less than a month after its initial release, and before it had even officially been made available in some countries, the app had been downloaded over 100 million times. It became the fastest game to top the app and Google Play Store's charts, and usage of it exceeded that of Snapchat, Tinder, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Wherever you went, whoever you talked to, it seemed like everyone was playing it. It was people playing Pokemon GO that ain't never played Pokemon before. Like, I'm not even joking. Why were my 40-year-old managers at my old movie theater job playing it? On the clock. My university quickly formed a Pokemon GO club. On social media, it was all anyone could talk about. Step foot outside, and you'd be sure to see people wandering around, eyes glued to their phones, and you would immediately know that they were playing Pokemon GO. This seemed to be an overwhelmingly positive thing at first. The game was bringing people from all walks of life together like never before. Wholesome stories of connections made through the game began popping up online. On Reddit, one player claimed to have met a few guys when they were all playing the game in a park in the middle of the night, when a cop showed up, presumably to ask them why they were hanging around a public area at 3 a.m., but after explaining the game to him, he apparently downloaded it himself and started playing. I'm sorry, but this did forcibly remind me of that one Tumblr post about the cop who was a Homestuck fan. It was common to hear about people teaming up with random strangers to locate specific Pokemon, or even huge herds of people collectively chasing after a rare Mon. People who were ordinarily shy and introverted, or had conditions that made it difficult to connect with people, like anxiety, depression, or autism, were given a reason to leave their houses, sometimes for the first time in a long time, and more easily make new friends by bonding over the game. Not me, though. I remained an asocial little freak. One Taiwanese man apparently loved the game so much that he rigged 72 smartphones to his bicycle so he could ride around town playing the game across his 20 different accounts, earning him the nickname Uncle Pokemon. Why? I really couldn't say, but I have to respect the grind. There seemed to be more than just social benefits to playing the game, though. Many people noted the potential health benefits playing the game regularly could bring. Amid concerns that people were spending too much time inside on their computers, TVs, and game consoles, people were now heading outside and touching grass in droves. One study found that players were taking an average of 26% more steps per day, and that the game had a greater impact on people's walking habits than any of the most popular health apps. Some claimed that by encouraging them to be more active, the game helped them get in shape or improve their mental health. Pokemon GO was also credited with boosting the local economy in some areas by getting people to explore their communities, increasing foot traffic in urban areas, and drawing people into local businesses. Apparently there were even a few cases of crimes being solved or prevented because people out playing the game ended up in the right place at the right time to see something. As utopian as this all sounds, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, I'm afraid. Before long, Pokémon GO became plagued by controversies and incidents. As I alluded to a moment ago, some of the Pokestops and gyms ended up being placed at locations that were at best inappropriate and at worst downright dangerous. For instance, before the game was even officially released in South Korea, a gym was discovered along the Korean Demilitarized Zone, the border between North and South Korea. Definitely not a place you want to be aimlessly wandering around. Thankfully, it was removed pretty quickly. Other questionable locations included the Auschwitz Memorial Museum in Poland, Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park in Japan, and the 9/11 Memorial in New York City. Many considered playing the game at these locations to be disrespectful. Other locations were criticized for encouraging players to put themselves in situations where they could come to harm, like train tracks, abandoned buildings, fire stations, and literal minefields. Some places started to put up signs forbidding visitors from playing Pokémon GO on their property. And while it's great that the game was getting people to go outside, it wasn't exactly encouraging them to take in their surroundings. I'm a huge proponent of the mental health walk, or hot girl walk, or whatever we're calling it now, but one thing that really stuck out to me when I was playing the game during my research was that my walks didn't feel quite as restorative as they usually do, since I was basically staring at my phone the whole time, just like I do when I'm at home. Unfortunately, there can also be much more serious consequences of being unaware of your surroundings while out in public. Within mere hours of the game's release in Japan, a university student in Osaka fell down the stairs while playing and injured themselves badly enough that they needed to be rushed to the hospital. There were reports of people having their belongings stolen while they were preoccupied with playing the game by thieves who would lurk at popular Pokémon GO gathering spots, leading many police departments to issue warnings to players to be more vigilant. And, most sadly of all, some people even lost their lives as a direct result of playing the game. In Japan, a pedestrian was killed after they were struck by a distracted driver who was trying to catch Pokémon behind the wheel. In 2017, Jiansheng Chen, a Chinese man living in Virginia, was fatally shot by a security guard after inadvertently trespassing on the property of a community clubhouse while playing Pokémon GO. And these are just a few examples. You can find many more with a quick Google search. The game also drew criticism for some less serious things, namely the lack of Pokémon, Pokestops, and gyms available in certain areas, primarily rural areas and minority neighborhoods. As someone who lived in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of town that was largely surrounded by farmland at the time, I can personally attest to this. There was really only one Pokestop that I could reasonably walk to, a church that was a 2-kilometer walk away along a road with no sidewalks or streetlights, and 0 gyms, although they've since added more that are a lot closer. Pokémon GO is also to blame for this.
I don't know who created Pokémon GO, but I'm trying to figure out how we get them to have Pokémon go to the polls.
So that is another point against it, I'm afraid. Pokémon GO's impact really cannot be understated, even beyond the zeitgeist of the summer of 2016. I feel like a lot of people kind of forgot about it after that point, but we are still seeing the consequences of it even today, and I'd like to take a look at a few of the ways in which it has shaped popular culture, the companies involved in its creation, and particularly Pokémon as a franchise. The most obvious impact was, of course, the massive financial gains for Niantic, Nintendo, and the Pokémon Company. By the end of July 2016, Pokémon GO had already generated more than $160 million in revenue. By February 2017, it had made $1 billion, becoming the fastest app to do so. Nintendo's stock value soared, as did that of other Japanese companies related to Nintendo and Pokémon, including TV Tokyo, broadcaster of the Pokémon anime, Tomy, manufacturer of Pokémon toys and merchandise, Bank of Kyoto, a Nintendo shareholder, and even First Baking Company, a novelty bakery that produces Pokémon-inspired baked goods. The Pokémon brand received a huge boost in popularity. The anime's original theme song received a 630% increase in Spotify streams during July of 2016. Hulu, which carried several seasons of the anime at the time, saw a 10% daily increase in Pokémon streams in the days following GO's release. Apparently, even Pokémon-related searches on certain adult websites increased. Sales of the 3DS Pokémon games, X and Y, and the Gen 3 remakes, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, increased significantly, despite them being a few years old at that point. as did sales of the 3DS itself, which Nintendo directly attributed to the popularity of Pokémon GO. A few months after the release of Pokémon GO, the next mainline Pokémon games were released, Sun and Moon. They ended up becoming the best-selling 3DS games at the time and beat X and Y's launch sales numbers, selling over 10 million copies globally on the day of their release. It seemed that a second Pokémania was upon us. The Pokémon Company realized that they needed to capitalize on this renewed interest quickly before it died out. In particular, they wanted to convert Go players into players of the mainline games. Director of Sun and Moon, Shigeru Omori, said that Game Freak wanted to make the sequels Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon a good entry point for new players, for instance by making stronger Pokémon obtainable earlier in the game, or making the UI easier to navigate. However, some longtime fans weren't too thrilled about this. The criticism of the original Sun and Moon games was that they were too easy and held the player's hand too much, making them boring and tedious to play, and the sequels definitely didn't do anything to rectify this. If anything, they made it worse. For example, the Rotom Dex was given more dialogue meant to guide the player throughout the game, but experienced players tended to find it more irritating than helpful. As someone who's been playing Pokemon for damn near 20 years at this point and still isn't really that good at it, Pokemon games becoming too easy has never really been an issue for me personally, but it has become a major point of contention within the fanbase, something we'll touch on again momentarily. In 2017, the Nintendo Switch was released, and Pokemon fans were excited about what the next generation of games might look like on the new console. However, the first Pokemon games to be announced for the system were not what they had been expecting. Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee were released in 2018, making the second time the first generation of games had received a remake. Story-wise, they were fairly faithful remakes of Pokemon Yellow, but they were markedly different from most mainline Pokemon games in terms of mechanics. For one, several features common to the series had been removed, including abilities, held items, and breeding. Catching Pokemon was also very different. Pokemon now appeared roaming around the overworld instead of being random encounters in grass, water, or caves. You no longer had to battle a Pokemon in order to catch it. You just had to throw a Pokeball at it using the Joy-Con's motion controls, very similar to Pokemon GO's catching mechanics. The games shared other similarities with Go, including the addition of CP to a Pokemon's stats and candies that can be used to help boost their stats. Players could even transfer any Gen 1 Pokemon caught in Go into one of the Let's Go games. Game Freak stated that the intention of the Let's Go games was to bring in newcomers to the series, i.e. people whose introduction to Pokemon was Pokemon Go, as well as catering to veteran fans, i.e. Gen 1ers. It definitely accomplished that first goal, as these games sold even better than Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, but many older fans felt like these games were not meant for them. I myself have never played them and don't really care to. Like I said a moment ago, fans have been grumbling about the Pokemon games becoming too easy more and more ever since X and Y, and the Let's Go games certainly weren't helping matters. This began primarily with a change to the EXP share item made in Gen 6. Traditionally, it was a held item that split the EXP gained from a battle between the participating Pokemon and the Pokemon holding the EXP share. But it was changed to be a key item that, if turned on, splits the EXP among all Pokemon in the party. Let's Go took this one step further by doing away with the EXP share altogether and instead splitting EXP among all members of the party automatically, without the ability to turn this feature off. A highly contentious change that has remained in all subsequent Pokemon games and is still fueling arguments on Twitter to this day. The next Pokemon games to be released were Sword and Shield in 2019. While they returned to normal pre-Let's Go mechanics, these games ended up being even more controversial than the last ones, beginning the trend of every release of a new Pokemon game being accompanied by months' worth of online discourse. The controversy was mainly surrounding Game Freak's decision to cut many Pokemon from Sword and Shield's National Pokédex, meaning players may not be able to transfer all of their Pokemon from previous generations into the games. A controversy that came to be known as Dexit, since this was also around the time that Brexit was happening. Game Freak's reasoning for this was that there were now so many Pokemon that they simply didn't have enough time to create brand new models and animations for every single one of them before the game was slated to release that November. Upon release, players also noticed that some graphics looked a little rough, and that some of the models and animations actually appeared to be identical to those from the 3DS games. This raised an issue that in retrospect seemed to have become a bit of a trend for Game Freak. For the past few years, a lot of the Pokemon games had felt rushed or incomplete, and this had become especially apparent with Sword and Shield. A new mainline Pokemon game had been released every year from 2016 to 2019, when previously going 1 or even 2 years without a new game was the norm. Despite the backlash, this trend continued, with subsequent releases Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, the long-awaited Gen 4 remakes, and Scarlet and Violet, the most recent games as of now, receiving similar criticisms. A part of me wonders whether the surge in popularity after Pokémon GO caused the Pokémon Company to put pressure on Game Freak to deliver games more frequently to meet demand and capitalize on this newfound audience. And it's not just the games that got more popular, it's the whole franchise, which is very much interlinked. If a game gets delayed, that would also delay new episodes of the anime and new card and merch releases, which could damage profits. Not that they need the money that badly, I'm sure, but late-stage capitalism, etc., etc. And again, people complained about the lack of difficulty of all of these games, and accused Game Freak of pandering to casual players while essentially giving a middle finger to longtime fans. I think these accusations could be true to some degree, but only because the casual Pokémon GO crowd and, little kids playing the game for the first time are who make up the majority of the Pokémon player base at this point. Some people encouraged boycotting Sword and Shield during the Dexit controversy, but they still ended up becoming the second best-selling Pokémon games of all time, only behind the original Red, Blue, and Green. Scarlet and Violet sales numbers aren't far behind, and even Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, possibly the most shat upon of all of these games, sold nearly double the amount of copies of Platinum, one of the most beloved games in the franchise by hardcore fans. It's okay, Platinum. You'll always be number 1 in my heart. Despite all of this, it does seem like Game Freak might finally be listening to the feedback. Fans are cautiously optimistic for Legend ZA, or ZA for my fellow Commonwealthers, as it looks like it's going to incorporate some things fans have been asking for a long time, and it won't be released until October of this year, 3 years after Scarlet and Violet were released, the longest gap in releases we've had for some time. While the games have always been the central pillar of the Pokémon franchise to me, in recent years, the TCG has become increasingly popular to the point where it has eclipsed all other areas of the franchise in the current pop cultural zeitgeist. In fact, it's become a bit of a craze, akin to both the original Pokémania and the Pokémon GO mania of 2016. The 2023-2024 fiscal year was reportedly the most successful for the TCG in 8 years, with over 11.9 billion cards sold. Stores have had trouble keeping new releases in stock, and videos have emerged of hordes of people lining up before stores open, sweeping entire shelves of cards into their shopping carts, and even getting into physical altercations in order to get their hands on them, like they're a Stanley Cup or a Labubu. This scarcity, of course, means that particularly rare cards or sets become astronomically expensive on the resale market, and a lot of the people engaging in frankly embarrassing behavior in the middle of Costco are unfortunately scalpers who wouldn't know a Magikarp if one slapped them on the ass. Earlier this year, a card shop near me posted footage from their security camera on Instagram that showed someone breaking into their shop, but the intruder didn't go for the cash register or the safe, he started loading booster packs into his bag. Shit is getting out of hand. Even the people who do want to collect the cards for themselves and not just sell them are often the same kind of people who got really into Pokémon GO in the summer of 2016. Those who hadn't expressed much, if any, interest in Pokémon prior, and who didn't really engage with other aspects of the franchise or fandom, but were just jumping on the bandwagon. A major driving force behind this fad appears to be social media influencers and creators who make videos where they open booster pack after booster pack, or spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to obtain some highly sought-after card, some of them being the last people you would expect to be making Pokemon-related content.
Oddish, Growlite, Nidorina.
Bro can't even pronounce Growlithe correctly. Pokemon is absolutely everywhere now, in a way that it really wasn't when I was younger. Ironically, younger me would have loved this, but adult me just finds it kind of annoying. I don't want to seem like I'm trying to gatekeep Pokemon. I don't really know how I could gatekeep the largest media franchise in the world that's been around since before I was born anyway, but when you've lived through being looked down upon for having certain interests, and then all of a sudden those same people who are looking down upon you like that thing because it's trendy now, you can't help but be a little bitter. As for Nintendo, Pokémon GO's success paved the way for them to finally branch out into the mobile gaming industry. Previous forays into mobile games, such as Miitomo, ended up not being very successful long-term, but Pokémon GO proved that not only was it possible to make a successful mobile game based on a Nintendo property, It could potentially even boost sales of their consoles and games. In 2018, Nintendo's new president Shuntaro Furukawa stated that he planned to continue Nintendo's drive into mobile games towards being a 100 billion yen, approximately 1 billion USD, per year revenue source for the company, and try to create more games that were as successful as Pokémon GO. Several mobile games based on popular Nintendo franchises have been released following Pokémon GO, including Super Mario Run, Fire Emblem Heroes, Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, Mario Kart Tour, and Pikmin Bloom, another AR game that was developed by Niantic. More Pokemon mobile games have been released too, such as Pokemon Masters, Pokemon Cafe Mix, Pokemon Unite, Pokemon Sleep, and Pokemon TCG Pocket. None of these games have quite reached the same heights as Pokemon GO, but many of them have been decently popular. Even Pokemon GO itself never again reached the highs of summer 2016, but it has retained a dedicated core fanbase who are still playing to this day, and the game is still receiving regular updates. Earlier this year, Niantic sold Pokemon GO and some of its other games to mobile game developer Scopely. This caused some mild controversy, partially because players worried the quality of updates would decline, but also because Scopely's parent company, Savvy Games, is apparently funded by the Saudi Arabian government, and people were worried about their personal data falling into their hands. Frankly, I'm not really sure why you're concerned about the Saudi government having your data and not like the American government or the Chinese government, but go off, I guess. Scopely have assured fans that they have no plans to make any major changes to the game, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not they keep their word. I probably won't be keeping Pokemon GO on my phone for much longer because it's just not the kind of game that really holds my interest for very long, but I definitely have some fond memories attached to it, and it's fascinating to look at how much of an impact it had on both our culture and the Pokemon franchise, even if not all of it was necessarily positive. Did you play Pokemon GO in 2016? Do you still play it now? Do you have any crazy Pokemon GO related stories? I would love to hear all about it down in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, liking, subscribing, and sharing would be very much appreciated. And remember that you can always become a channel member by clicking the button below for bonus perks and content. I will catch y'all in the next one. A huge thank you to all of my channel members, and an extra special thank you to my Pookies, Spend My Savings, Bantama, Raven, Molly, Johannes Refnison, Buttered Paranoia, Vada Huff, Sabelly Sam, Ryuji is a Phantom Thief, Mellow Streep, Inu Shampoo, Star Lover, Satanic Panic, Rex Nola, Damian Bestie, Sebastian Brady, Mr. Logan 1223, and Waimu. You guys are awesome.